Well, good evening, everybody. And we are now live on the Cincinnati Right to Life channel. So I'm going to give everybody just a couple of minutes to try to get on here and see if a few people join us. In the meantime, I do encourage you to please post any questions or comments here in the comment section. We will give it just a few minutes. And I will just double check that you all can see it. And this is, again, the State of Life part of IHM Social Forum. My name is Meg DeBlaise. This is Cincinnati Right to Life. We are doing a forum on the State of Life 2020. All right. Give just a few more minutes for people to join us here. The event starts at 7 o'clock. Again, my name is Meg DeBlaise, and we are here with Cincinnati Right to Life, IHM's Social Forum. And I will just continue to give people just a few more minutes to get logged on. Okay, and we are live right now. It is appearing. So you can post. Hi, David. It's nice to see you, Deacon Dave. I'm glad to have you here. We're still waiting on just a couple more folks. I know Jane has not been able to get on yet. Looks like, okay, it looks like we've got a few more, so that's great. Let me get in touch with Jane. She's not been able. Hi, Marge. Nice to see you. Glad you're on here. I'm waiting for Jane, so I'm not sure she's been on here yet, but I'll ask her to comment when she does. So I think she's getting there, but this isn't like a Zoom call, so I guess we can't all talk to each other on here either. So it's just me, but I'll give Jane just another minute. In fact, I think I'm going to email her. I think she needs some help getting logged on. Give me just a few minutes, you guys. All right, I'm sending Jane the link. And again, we will get started in just a minute. It's kind of crazy timing, isn't it? We have this going on and then our event on October the 10th. So just so many things happening all at the same time, but it's great. It's really great. Jane, if you are on, let us know and post a comment, and then I will just go ahead and get started. I'm still texting with Jane. Hopefully she was able to figure it out. All right, Jane is on. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So as you all know, for anybody listening, you may not know that tonight is IHM's one of their social forums. So thanks to Jane Elfers, I am doing this particular social forum, which of course was supposed to be in person, and because of COVID-19 is not. But instead, we're doing this live stream. And so I welcome you. I thank you for joining us tonight and for being a part of the presentation that I'm going to give. My name is Meg DeBlaise, and I'm the director of Cincinnati Right to Life. And my goal tonight is to just share with you what we're calling like the state of life 2020. So I'm going to touch on some past information, some things that have been going on in the pro-life movement, and then also what we're looking at in the future. But before I get into that, I want to share some stories with you guys, because I think that they really that stories really help us understand what the culture is like and what's really going on in our neighborhoods, in our state, and in our country. So I think that the most touching story, or I should say story that's really affected me a lot, has actually happened this week. So I got a call 2 days ago from a volunteer who was aware that there was a gentleman outside of Planned Parenthood waiting outside to try to stop his girlfriend from going inside and aborting their baby. So we did absolutely everything that we could. We called a couple of lawyers that we know. The reality is that men, when it comes to abortion, have absolutely no say and no right whatsoever. So they have no say what happens to their unborn child. So this gentleman was outside of Planned Parenthood. I actually went down there and I stood with him for a while. And in fact, it touched me so much because he was close to my age, and he was a really good man, and he was very convicted that he would do anything really to save his unborn child. But his girlfriend was just adamant. So we don't really know what happened, but he really had no power. And so we stood on the sidewalk and we prayed, and that's all that we could do. But of course, we certainly do hope and pray that God will take away his suffering and will also help this young woman and her unborn baby as well. Also, there was a case in June of 2017, and some of the details of this case are actually just now coming out, but in Columbus, Ohio, at the Riverside Methodist Church, there were 2 twin boys that were born at 22 weeks and 5 days gestation. And these little boys, Emery and Elliot, were their names. They were born at this hospital, and they were obviously premature. But when they were born, the hospital staff did nothing to help them survive, and that was based on some law that they were quoting, and also based on the fact that they deemed that these little boys' lives just weren't worth saving. Maybe they weren't going to have a good quality of life, that kind of thing. It's really a dreadful story. The two little boys were born. The first little boy lived about 45 minutes. The second little boy lived 2.5 hours, and he cried and was breathing on his own. And the mother is pleading. They have actual video footage of this. The mother is pleading with the doctors to do something, and they won't do anything. They won't save these tiny little boys. Martin Haskell. Let's talk about Martin Haskell. So I'm going to assume that the people who are watching this probably know who Martin Haskell is. He's an abortionist that's been around a long time. He had actually several locations at different points in time in Cincinnati. We did get him shut down in Sharonville most recently, but he still has an abortion facility in the Dayton area. In fact, he has been in all kinds of legal trouble over the years, and his license was ultimately revoked, and the Ohio Supreme Court upheld that and said that that was legal and binding. There was nothing that they could do. But a couple weeks later, the Ohio Department of Health, under Director Amy Acton, came in and granted him a new license to operate. So this was probably about a year ago at this point. Martin Haskell is proud of the fact that he invented partial birth abortion. So he likes to claim that. We also know from our pregnancy centers and from them working with all the other women that Haskell is still doing late-term abortions when someone will go to him. And then I also want to tell you another story, something that happened in the Mount Carmel Health System. This is also near Columbus. About a year and a half ago, there was a doctor, Dr. William Husel, who euthanized at least 25 patients that they've been able to identify. So he was euthanizing disabled and elderly patients, overdosing them. And it finally came to light, and now he's being prosecuted for that. But there were medical professionals involved in this, and they were giving these high doses of medication, and they were killing elderly and disabled people. So these are just a couple examples of things that are going on in our culture, that are going on in our state. And some of these really hit home because they're really close. They're really close to where we live. They're really close to, where we work, that kind of thing. We have a culture ultimately that does not value human life. Now, at Cincinnati Right to Life, there are a lot of life issues to cover, right? So we study, we take efforts towards ending abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, and assisted suicide. But the reality is that abortion, it takes a priority over all of these other things because so many lives are taken by abortion. So our priority always ends up in abortion, and we are very concerned about the other issues as well. But I'm going to talk a lot about abortion tonight. And I want to start, since this is the Catholic group, I want to start with the Catholic Church's teaching on abortion. So the Catechism of the Catholic Church states, and I quote, "Since the first century, the Church has affirmed the moral evil of every procured abortion. This teaching has not changed and remains unchangeable. Direct abortion, that is to say, abortion willed either as an end or a means, is greatly contrary to the moral law." This is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 2271. Also, if you go back and look and you read about the fifth commandment in the Catechism, it says that human life is sacred because from its beginning, it involves the creative action of God, and it remains forever in a special relationship with the Creator, who is its sole end. God alone is the Lord of life from its beginning until its end. No one can, under any circumstance, claim for himself the right directly to destroy an innocent human being. That is also from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So take that a step further, and I want to also give you some information from the document Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, because you're probably familiar with this. Maybe you've seen it in your church bulletins, maybe it's been emailed to you, but it's essentially a teaching document on the political responsibility of Catholics. It's very extensive, so it's not something that I can address in this live stream. I can't tackle the whole thing. So I took a few excerpts from it, and I want to touch on those right now and talk about the abortion issue. So something that they say, they make a summary of the different positions on issues, and they say that in this brief summary, we bishops call attention to issues with significant moral dimensions that should be carefully considered in each campaign and as policy decisions are made in the years to come. As the description below indicates, some issues involve principles that can never be abandoned, such as the fundamental right to life and marriage as the union of one man and one woman. Others reflect our judgment about the best way to apply Catholic principles to policy issues. So we need to make the distinction here between policy issues and moral law, natural law, right? Intrinsic evil, for instance, in the case of abortion. But let's go even a step further, and there's a really interesting article out there, or a write-up by Archbishop Naumann, who is the Archbishop of Kansas City. He's also the chair of the USCCB Committee on Pro-Life Activities. And he says that as Catholics approach the polls, they'll be weighing many important issues. But the U.S. bishops have affirmed, and he quotes this, "The threat of abortion remains our preeminent priority because it directly attacks life itself, because it takes place within the sanctuary of the family, and because the number of lives destroyed." While they did warn us not to dismiss or ignore other serious threats to human life and dignity, such as racism, the environment, the environmental crisis, poverty, and the death penalty, they did give priority to upholding and defending our brothers and sisters' most basic right to live. So I want to actually just break this down a little bit piece by piece. So the USCCB is saying that abortion remains a preeminent priority. Well, preeminent, what is that? Preeminent means surpassing all others, that it's distinguished from others in a certain way. And priority also means that it's of greater importance relative to the other things around it. So abortion remains a preeminent priority because it directly attacks life itself. Well, we know that. We know that abortion takes an innocent human being's life. We know that life begins at fertilization. And we know that taking the life of an innocent human being is an intrinsic evil, and it is forbidden by the Catholic Church. The next thing they say is that it takes place within the sanctuary of the family. So this is another reason why it's a priority, because it takes place inside the family. Evangelium Vitae by John Paul II on the value and inviolability of human life, he actually says, he makes a lot of good points, but he says that even more serious is the fact that most often those attacks, meaning abortion, are carried out in the very heart of and with the complicity of the family. The family, which by its nature is called to be the sanctuary of life. So this is one of those things that makes abortion particularly evil, because it takes place within the sanctuary of life. And then finally, it's a preeminent priority because of the number of lives destroyed by abortion. Almost 62 million children have been killed since 1973. And we toss these numbers around. We do see them a lot, especially us as pro-lifers, right? But it's really hard to wrap your head around what 62 million babies looks like. What does that feel like? It's just so overwhelming. It's such a huge number. It's so overwhelming. And quite frankly, it is likely much higher than that because not all states even report abortion numbers. But for a little perspective, in Ohio every year, there are about 20,000 abortions. There are about 3,000 abortions committed at Planned Parenthood of Southwest Ohio in Cincinnati every year. So about 3,000 at Planned Parenthood of Southwest Ohio. So for all these reasons, abortion is truly the priority, and is something that Catholic voters, that Christian voters, that we should be looking at that and making decisions based on pro-life or abortion policy, as the case may be. Because without the right to life, obviously, no other rights matter. If you haven't been born, none of these other issues even affect you in any way, shape, or form. As you likely know, abortion is legal throughout the United States of America because of Roe v. Wade and because of Doe v. Bolton. The Roe v. Wade decision made abortion legal throughout all 9 months of pregnancy in all 50 states. Doe v. Bolton was ruled on at the exact same time. And what Doe v. Bolton did is that they ruled that abortion could be done for the health of the mother, but they defined health in a very, very broad way to include factors, and I quote, physical, emotional, psychological, familial, and the woman's age relevant to the well-being of the patient. So they expanded that health exception, if you will, that essentially gives Planned Parenthood or any abortion provider any reason in the world to do an abortion and get away with it by law. Now, abortion is, of course, regulated in varying degrees across the country in various states. So when you look at it, and the country is fairly divided over this, actually. 17 states have limits on abortion after 20 weeks post-fertilization. 26 states have ultrasound requirements, and 32 states have enforceable informed consent laws, meaning that these providers have to be upfront and honest with women about the true side effects of abortion and their options. In Ohio, just to give you some perspective, an abortion has to be performed before 20 weeks post-fertilization, except in cases of life endangerment or severely compromised health. That is the Ohio law. Ohio law also requires a 24-hour waiting period from the time that a woman has an initial consultation to the time that the abortion is performed. Abortionists are required to perform ultrasounds as well, and at least offer to the patient that they can view the image of the ultrasound. Now, as you also may know, Ohio's heartbeat law passed in April of 2019. It was signed into law by Governor Mike DeWine. And the heartbeat law protects babies who have a detectable heartbeat. So basically what it says is that an abortionist must check for a heartbeat, and if they detect one, they cannot commit an abortion. The heartbeat bill also had a lot of other great, strong pro-life provisions in it, like setting up a civil remedy for post-abortive women, setting up a joint legislative committee on adoption. So that would take place legislative-wise in the state house to improve adoption. It also requires abortionists to report whether an abortion is done for maternal health reasons or not. They establish foster care and adoption initiatives. So the heartbeat bill was really, at its core, it was meant to end abortion for babies with a detectable heartbeat. But there were lots of other great pro-life provisions in there as well. Now, unfortunately, Judge Michael Barrett, a George Bush appointee, has issued a preliminary injunction against the heartbeat bill and the heartbeat law, and it is now in the court system waiting to be heard. Other issues that we do touch on, I just want to touch on these really briefly. Infanticide, which of course is the killing of an infant, euthanasia, and then assisted suicide. There is a growing movement, certainly, of pushing for euthanasia, pushing for assisted suicide. Essentially, both of these involve another person facilitating the death of someone else. In the case of euthanasia, there is typically no consent from a patient. In the case of assisted suicide, the patient is consenting and even requesting help to kill themselves. These are a growing trend, and right now, assisted suicide is actually legal in 9 states. It is still illegal in the state of Ohio. Euthanasia is also illegal in the state of Ohio, as is infanticide. But there is good news, and there's lots of progress being made in the pro-life movement recently. Over the past several years, incredible strides in the pro-life movement. Over 200 judges have been appointed to the federal judiciary, including 2 Supreme Court justices, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and of course, now Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who may be selected to join the Supreme Court. So that would be now 3 new pro-life justices on the Supreme Court if Amy Coney Barrett gets in. These judicial appointments are so critical. I cannot stress this enough. So you heard me talking about the heartbeat law. You heard me talking about a lot of different pieces of legislation, right? Well, the reality is that the next the next fight, the battle for life, is really going to be in the courtrooms because we're making progress in legislatures. We're passing good pro life laws, but they are getting fought in court. And so, what do we need in court? We need good, solid judges who respect God's law and who will uphold the Constitution, which does not grant a right to abortion, right? So, it's so critical that we have these judges all over the country, in all of our district courts, in our Supreme Court, right? This is generational. Most judgeships last until death. So most of them are an appointment for life for individuals unless they choose to retire. So this extends beyond any president, beyond any politician. And it's just so critical that we have judges in place, especially as we think about the potential for overturning Roe v. Wade, which I will get to at the end. But we really made great progress in judicial appointments, and we need to make more. The other great thing that's happening is that American citizens are really cutting back on paying for abortions. If you can believe that, a lot of us pay for abortion. You don't know it, but some of your taxpayer dollars do go towards abortion. So President Trump eliminated taxpayer funding of abortion overseas in all global health spending, not just family planning dollars. That is a key because it's nuanced, but it's really important. $8.8 billion of aid funds abortion overseas from the United States, and all of that has been taken away from them because the president said he wanted all global health funding pooled, not just federal family planning dollars. It's great because his administration is able to identify all of these funding streams for Planned Parenthood. He also set new rules in the federal budget. You're probably familiar with the Title X federal family planning dollars that got pulled from Planned Parenthood and abortion facilities, basically saying that that if you performed abortions, you could not get any federal family planning dollars. And of course, that eliminates Planned Parenthood. And of course, they weren't willing to give up doing abortions, so they are losing out on that funding now. Also, the administration has now permitted states to prohibit Medicaid funding of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood receives millions and millions of dollars through Medicaid funding. That is really a primary way that they get a lot of their money. And so what the administration has been able to do is allow states to not permit Medicaid reimbursements for abortion. Furthermore, the HHS recently issued a new rule requiring insurance companies to be transparent about their coverage of abortion so people like you and me can know whether or not our insurance company is funding abortions. And then they've also issued mandates for conscience protections for groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor, right? So that private employers and educational institutions will not provide or pay for things like contraceptives and abortifacient drugs. The reality is, in this whole Planned Parenthood funding issue, is that Planned Parenthood has so many avenues of funding. The federal budget and the state budget all over the place. Planned Parenthood has these avenues of funding. So it's just critical that we tap into every single one of that we can and cut them off. And there's still more that needs to be done, certainly in defunding Planned Parenthood, but this is a good start. Also, the United States is fighting abortion on the international stage. Now, at Cincinnati Right to Life, we don't talk about this a lot, but I find it very fascinating, and I think it's important for us to know. And again, this is going to get into some of these little nuanced things that I'm talking about. So, the president, as you probably know, cut taxpayer funding to the UN Population Fund, which is an incredibly pro-abortion organization that supports China and their horrible one-child, now two-child policy and forced abortions and just gruesome population control. So we pulled funding for that. And in addition to the president's great speech in 2019 to the UN General Assembly, where he said that America will not fund abortion. In fact, I want to read the quote because it's so good and it's so powerful. He said, among other things, he said, quote, "We are aware that many United Nations projects have attempted to assert a global right to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand. right up until the moment of delivery. Global bureaucrats have no business attacking the sovereignty of nations that wish to protect innocent life. Like many nations here today, we in America believe that every child born and unborn is a sacred gift from God. So he announced that at a UN General Assembly. And you can only imagine how people must have responded to that in the room. I wish I could have been there. Furthermore, though, as we look into especially this United Nations stuff, the Trump administration officials have been instructed now to amend any UN resolutions that include the terms sexual and reproductive health. Okay, well, sexual and reproductive health, these are basically gateways to abortion on demand worldwide, especially to some of our third world countries, and they're gateways to explicit sex education programs all over the world. So they're saying, nope, we will amend any resolutions that include these terms, sexual and reproductive health. So that's what I mean when we talk about it being a little bit nuanced, but so critical because the terminology really does affect the laws. It affects the funding. So it's really critical. Finally, overall, I think over the past several years, we've seen a shift, really the past decade or two, we've seen a shift towards a slightly more pro-life society. So if you look at surveys, no, you're not going to see that America is pro-life. You're definitely going to see that America is very divided over this issue. But if you look closely, you will see things like younger generations don't want abortion to be paid for by taxpayers. Younger generations believe in restrictions on abortions. So they are not for this abortion up until the moment of birth type thing. So you're kind of seeing a little bit of that shift. And more recently, the pro-life voice and way of life is really being protected. For instance, the president very recently issued an executive order to protect babies born alive, no matter the circumstances of why they were a premature baby, perhaps they were born after an attempted abortion, perhaps they were born early due to some disability. But this goes back to that case where I talked about those two twin boys early on in this presentation. This executive order would protect those two twin boys. It would say, no, you have to provide medical care for these babies. You don't get to just set some kind of rule at 22 weeks and 5 days gestation. That's only when we start treating babies born alive. Not acceptable. Definitely not acceptable. So this executive order will protect all babies born alive, regardless of the circumstances. Trump also issued an executive order in June to bolster America's foster care and adoption programs, and he increased partnerships with faith-based organizations. He's protecting faith-based adoption, which is critical to pro-lifers and our way of life and our ability to adopt children through faith-based organizations and as faith-filled people. He's defended pro-life students' right to free speech by threatening to pull federal funds from universities that violate the First Amendment. And, he's recently even issued a new rule clarifying that the federal definition of sex discrimination under Obamacare does not include abortion. Again, nuanced little thing, very, very important when it comes to healthcare coverage. So these types of protections enable pro-lifers not only to live our beliefs, but also they help us to inspire this true culture of life, right? And so it's very important. We've made a lot of progress in the past, but we are on the cusp of some change in our country, and it is possible that we could end up on another trajectory. So right now, we're on a good trajectory. We're on the pathway that leads towards more lives saved, fewer abortions, a greater culture of life, greater respect for the dignity of every human being. But that may not be the case if we end up on what I will call the path of death, because it really is. It really is a path of death. We're dealing with an election right now that touches on this life issue, particularly related to abortion, which we believe is the ultimate life issue. The path of death leads to many more innocent lives destroyed by death, destroyed by immorality. The Susan B. Anthony list, which is a leading national pro-life organization, said that this particular presidential ticket constitutes the most pro-abortion presidential ticket in American history. I want to tell you what we can expect if we end up on this path, because I think it's important for us to understand what we're getting into. The courts will be dominated by pro-abortion activists. And you just heard me talk about how critical the courts are to overturning Roe, to getting our pro-life laws enforced and actually into action, right, in our states. Well, this party, if we end up on this path, they will stack the courts with pro-abortion judges. Pro-life advocates have fought for years to pass laws which ultimately landed in the court system. So it's critical that we keep and get more pro-life judges in the courts. If we end up on this path, we may lose a lot of those battles in the courtroom, and we'll basically be set back. We could be set back to the beginning in some cases, and starting all over from scratch in certain states with pro-life laws in particular. So this particular presidential ticket has gone on record stating that their judicial nominees will support Roe v. Wade. So that's pretty clear. We know where they stand. Also, abortions will be paid for with your hard-earned tax money. So you've probably heard of the Hyde Amendment, which forbids most taxpayer dollars from funding abortion, except in certain cases. Now, according to the Charlotte Lozier Institute, which is the research arm of the Susan B. Anthony list, they said that since the Hyde Amendment in 1976, they estimate that it saved about 2 million unborn children. So on this path, they would get rid of the Hyde Amendment entirely, forcing you and me, all of us, to pay for the abortions of our fellow citizens. They would restore federal funding for Planned Parenthood by not permitting states to refuse Medicaid reimbursements. We just talked about that. And then they would give Planned Parenthood and company federal family planning dollars again. So essentially, you would just see a total reversal of all of those steps that have been taken to defund Planned Parenthood. They'll be gone, and they'll be reversed, and Planned Parenthood will be back getting millions and billions more dollars. On this path, we will also have millions more dead babies, and that is just the reality. And I'm sorry that it sounds so harsh, but it's just true, and we need to be upfront and honest about that. This presidential ticket believes in increased access to abortion, and they have not been quiet about that. Planned Parenthood, in fact, has endorsed them and said that they are, quote, deeply committed to not only protecting reproductive rights, but also advancing and expanding them. Furthermore, and this part is particularly disturbing, I think, because we're seeing a rise in chemical abortions and in the abortion pill. So if this ticket takes over, if we end up on this path of death, okay, the abortion pill will be available over the counter, likely. So this will then be resulting in women giving birth to dead babies in toilets at home, in their dorm rooms, in public restrooms, and the like. There should be no doubt in anybody's mind that the abortion rate will rise under this ticket. Roe v. Wade will be codified into law. If you want to know what their strategy is to take Roe v. Wade and make it federal law. So think about that. Roe v. Wade is not a law. It was passed. It was ruled upon by the Supreme Court, but it is not a law. And what they want to do is codify it into law, right? So they've even said they will work to do that, and their Justice Department will do everything to stop, quote, the rash of state laws that so blatantly violate Roe v. Wade, end quote. So they're taking it right to us. They're taking it right to the pro-life community. They are not secret about this. They want Roe v. Wade codified into law. Furthermore, I do believe that pro-lifers will be persecuted. I think that we have already, and there have been lots of troubling cases of pro-lifers being persecuted, getting arrested, getting tried for all kinds of ridiculous things. Take, for instance, David Daleiden, right, who exposed the sale of baby body parts by Planned Parenthood. Well, he's still in court over that. And he has suffered greatly, and he has been attacked by Planned Parenthood. He has been attacked by the left, and he's been attacked by some people on this presidential ticket. They will remove conscience protections. So think about the Little Sisters of the Poor again. They'll have them right back in court, just trying to keep from paying for contraceptives, which of course we know go against their deeply held religious beliefs. There will be no place for pro-life people in this path of death, and we will be persecuted for our stand for life. That is true. The path of life, the trajectory that we're on right now, we need to stay on it. We need to keep the momentum, keep that trajectory towards overturning Roe v. Wade, completely defunding abortion, establishing absolute protection for the most vulnerable people, our precious little ones in our lives. This path leads to more pro-life judges appointed, moving the needle closer to overturning Roe v. Wade, total defunding of Planned Parenthood, the United States championing life all over the world, not even here, not just here, but all over the world, and the pro-life voice and way of life protected, cherished, a culture of life built. So we have so much progress still to make for this culture of life, but we're on the right trajectory. We're headed the right direction. We just need to keep going. It's critical that we defend the right to life first among all other issues. And once we establish that, and we can tackle other issues right now, certainly as much as we can, but we absolutely need to have pro-life politicians. We need to have pro-life judges. We need to have pro-life leaders, and we need to ensure that our country becomes totally pro-life. Abortion is the greatest human rights violation in the history of our world. Think about it. Someday their generations will look back on this in the way that we look back on the Holocaust and slavery. We've killed countless millions of unborn children. Our world has taken the greatest gift that God gave the human race, the gift of procreation, and utterly demolished its sacred dignity. The United States remains one of the few countries in the world desperately fighting against abortion, desperately fighting to rescue these precious preborn human beings. In November, each one of us has an individual decision to make. The decision that you make is without a doubt a very critical one, maybe one of the most critical of your life, because the lives of little preborn human beings depend upon your vote. This is not about Democrats and Republicans, and I'm not here to support any particular party. It's not even about conservatives and liberals. It's just about life and death, and it's about the distinction between an ultimate and intrinsic evil and then other things that may just be policy related. So I encourage you to vote for life. And at this point, I will take any questions. If anybody has any, I'll take a look at the comments section. Jane, thanks for your comments on the Planned Parenthood funding. Yes, indeed. It's really important for us to remember that the United States has not been only funding abortion here with our taxpayer dollars, but we've also been funding it all over the world, right? Giving billions of dollars to abortion funding all over the world, which is really should be unacceptable to all of us. But again, we're trying to tackle all of those different funding streams of Planned Parenthood. And a lot of them have been, but there's still work to do. Any questions? Go ahead and you can type them in the comments section. And while you guys do that, I have a question that I thought may come up. So some people may ask, are we morally forbidden, especially as a Catholic, for instance, are we morally forbidden to vote for a pro-abortion candidate, right? And I've read a lot about this. I've tried to determine, what is the reality? Are you permitted to vote for a pro-abortion candidate? Is that acceptable? And the answer is no. It is not under any circumstance acceptable for you to vote for a pro-abortion candidate, because a vote for that person would make you an accomplice to this moral evil, to this intrinsic evil. Because moral evils like abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, they're totally black and white. They're objectively and intrinsically evil according to the teachings of the Catholic Church and according to natural law. A candidate's position to support any of these evil acts renders that candidate unacceptable, regardless of their position on other matters. So look, you don't have to vote for a person who is pro-life, but you can't vote for a person who is pro-abortion. Think about it this way: it's policy versus moral principle. Some people may say, well, I like this person's policies better, but they're pro-abortion. That's still not acceptable because abortion goes against the natural law. So we have to vote on moral principle first, and then we may vote on policy after that. So Dave asked, are other parishes holding these forums and what is their response? Deacon Dave, I'm not sure. I haven't been involved in this forum. I know that on college campuses, they're doing some types of forums for voting and that kind of thing. And they try to tackle issues. Most of those have been focused on racism and LGBTQ issues is mostly what I've heard that are happening on college campuses. It would be great to have something like this on a college campus, frankly, something about the life issues. I've not heard of other churches doing these forums, but I'm sure Jane might be able to shed light on that at some point if you talk to her offline. Great. Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions. I appreciate all of you joining me tonight, and I hope that you found this presentation informative. You can always go to our website, cincinnatiRightToLife.org. We've recently updated it, so it's got some great new information for you. You're always welcome to contact our office and reach out to me, Meg DeBlaze, or any of our staff in the office there to help you out. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for all you do for life, and have a wonderful evening.